All right, so you will notice I was in the rain. I decided to kind of stay in the rain for the beginning of this video, but I do end up going to a non-rainy day a little bit later in the video. This is just to kind of show you what the housing district sort of looked like based on what I had at the start. This is what we had gotten done on stream, so I will say that there was definitely a lot of improvements that I wanted to make off stream. You'll notice that I first start by taking out my Island Designer app. Pathing is one of the first things I decided I needed to fix. So with the houses, what I noticed at the end of our stream was that the houses were just too close together between the front row and the back row. I didn't mind the spacing on the side yards. I kind of liked that it was a little bit small, a little bit narrow, but on the, front to back, it was just too close. You couldn't really see the second row of houses. It just didn't look right. So I decided the first thing I was going to do was mess with the pathing and figure out how thick or how thin the pathing should be and how far away the pathing needed to be. So I kind of made it 4 wide just to sort of see, and then I decided that I really wanted to put fencing behind this first row of houses. And so in order to put fencing down, I chose, I didn't want to put the fencing on the stone. I'd rather have this fencing on the grass. So I took away a whole row of pathing so I could put down this fencing. And then I was going back to look at, how does the pathing actually look with what I have now. So I was trying to decide whether or not to have it be 2 wide path or 3 wide path behind the fencing. And at that point I had decided, I think a 2 wide path is sufficient and I wouldn't want to put a house after a third layer of pathing. And so rather than have that third layer of pathing there, I just took away that entire row. You will see later, I actually go back and add that row again once the houses are in place, because I do think it adds a nice sense of depth to the area. And I'll do the same sort of thing on the front row of houses instead of just having 2 wide. But for the moment, we stuck with just the 2 wide because that seemed to make the most sense. So now I'm going to go in my house and we're going to grab that fencing in order to add the fencing to the back row of the front, add the fencing to the back of the front row of houses. That was kind of a tongue twister. Okay, so yeah, here you just see me putting down the fencing. I decided I was just going to use a classic kind of style of fence. It felt very much like something that you would see in a housing district, especially one that was kind of formal like this. So that's what I chose to do. And then I just sort of checked, make sure it looked good before heading back into my house to grab some bushes. And so I wanted to add a little bit more greenery to the area. I wanted to add something that would sort of add a little bit more personality, still sticking with our theme though. So I chose to incorporate the bushes, not necessarily all in the exact same spot next to the houses, just to sort of add that personality that I was talking about. And you'll see, of course, each house has its own sort of item to go with it so that, again, there's a little bit personality alongside each person's side yard. And here you're noticing I'm just putting down that extra layer of path that I was talking about for the front row of houses. I was still kind of sort of testing it out at this point. I wasn't sure if it was going to look good or not, but ultimately I decided that I thought having the path go under the front row of the houses, under their porch, would make a lot of sense, and so that's what we chose to do here. Now, after I decided that I actually liked where the pathing was, and I didn't mind that it was kind of 3 wide for a little bit, I thought about the flowers. The flowers was kind of the next thing that I was considering, and I decided that I didn't like the flowers in these sort of like alcove moments. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And so what I ended up doing is I decided I'm going to get rid of some of the pathing and I would add just the brown as like an under row or pattern underneath the flowers. And I would move the flowers up by a space. Of course, I just threw that little bouquet there to sort of hide that weird, awkward corner. And I decided that I would try to put a gnome here, but it was okay. It was like good enough for the moment, but I ended up going back and changing the gnome out a little bit later. So now I just, of course, go back into my house just so that I could get a couple extra shovels since I knew I was going to be moving flowers, and it's always annoying when your shovel breaks right as you're trying to dig up a flower. So, of course, I just went inside to get that, and then we decided to start planting some of those flowers in the front row here. I did move the flower petal pile. It didn't quite make sense where it was anymore because it started to look a little bit visually heavy in that corner. So I just sort of moved it so it would break up the path in the middle instead. And now I'm just going to run around, get a bunch of extra flowers that we're going to plant in that area. kind of sticking to my main color theme of pinks and whites and a couple of green mums, and sort of varying up the style of the flower, so not using only white roses or only pink hyacinths. I decided I needed to add a little bit more variety than that to this area, since it was very much just in a row, and I didn't want it to look a little bit too stiff or too manicured. So although, you know, we're kind of going for somewhere in between this like natural sort of style as well as like a manicured look, we're kind of playing with that idea of natural versus intentional here. So everything that I'm doing here is with the goal of sort of getting that in between sort of aesthetic. Okay, and you'll notice I'm just sort of changing out flowers as I see that I need to switch what was there, because I wasn't using like a standard pattern or anything that it was like roses, hyacinth, mum, or anything like that. And I also didn't want to use a different color of rose. I really wanted to stick to the white roses only in this area. I might end up using other color roses in another area, but I wanted to stick to the white ones here, so I kind of played with the different styles of flowers for the mums and the hyacinths instead. And then I went inside because I decided that I didn't like the gnome there. It didn't really make sense to me. It didn't fill up the path space that I needed it to. And so I tried out this drinking fountain. I tried a couple different things before I really am happy with what I end up putting there. The drinking fountain was not it for me. I tried putting a flower. None of it was really making sense on this weird, awkward corner for me. So I do go back in and out of my house a few times to sort of try something else, see what else I could put in the area. I think the garden wagon ended up being too big to go in that spot. It could have worked if it was a wider area, but because it was only one wide, it didn't really make sense to put the garden wagon or the cherry blossom stone. So even though I pick those up, I don't end up using them in that spot. So what I actually end up doing is I try the cherry blossom petal pile, and I feel like that made a lot of sense. So I used that, and then I added some fencing to the front of the housing district, just to sort of, again, give it a little bit of structure and make sure that it had sort of like a barrier, but I liked that it didn't have like a solid barrier. So, you know, sometimes when you're worrying about whether or not when you're worrying about like the flow of your island, you know, sometimes you want to put up a fence or bushes or anything, but you want to make sure you can still like get through reasonably easily. So I decided that having the fence on that outskirts kind of gave it that structure without really boxing in the housing district, because you were able to still get through in the areas where the fence like was not there. Like you could just run through the flowers and it wouldn't be a problem. So that's what I chose to do. And then of course we started to move the houses back in front of back into the back row of houses. So I had moved them all out of the way, and then I decided, you know, okay, at this point it's fine to move them back. So we're going to start with Phoebe's house. I don't know for sure yet who I'm keeping on this island. I do know that I love Phoebe though, so she's very likely to stay. And we're not sure about the other houses. So I'm not too worried about like what the houses themselves look like, because I figured, you know, that's something we can always change out later if we just change out the character. Okay, so this is kind of what it looked like in the daylight. I did stick with kind of early morning. Once again, I kind of noticed that there was this awkward corner where like the path stopped and it didn't really make sense. So I had to like move the flower petal a little bit just so that it would kind of cover that awkward spot. And then, of course, we're going to go in and move the next house. Okay, so we're going to come outside now. We're going to think about what this area sort of looks like as a whole. And what I actually decided at this point was that I do need that pathing underneath the house porches, just like I did in the front. It just seemed to make it a little bit more cohesive, make a little bit more sense to put it all together. And then, of course, I put Cody's plot down next without doing the pathing under it, because the pathing would just disappear if I had put the pathing there. So I chose to wait until the next day, and then I would put the pathing after. Okay, so after looking around, I decided, okay, time to move the next house, which is Astrid's. And then once we move Astrid's house, we can proceed. Okay, so once we have Astrid's house there the next day, I decide that the next thing I have to get done is, of course, putting down some of that pathing underneath the porches of the houses. So you'll see I'll get on my Island Designer tool and we'll start putting that pathing down in front of these houses. I then go in with the brick pattern and I sort of switch up between the petals and the blank brick just to kind of add a little variety to the pattern that we're seeing on the ground, especially because the 3 wide area back here does look a little bit thicker since I decided I wasn't going to plant that extra row of flowers with just the brown pathing. I felt like that made more sense in sort of the front area, but not necessarily in the middle of the housing district. So then I'm sort of messing with how do I make this path not feel quite so wide. And what I've tried to do is I put down some items, try to see if they would make sense. None of them were really working for me though, and so what I decided was forget these items. I'm just going to try to plant some of the bushes and other side yard things that I want instead of worrying about the items on the path itself, because I was also worried about obstructing the path and I didn't want it to be like too many items in the path. I thought it might make it a little bit cluttered feeling, so instead I went ahead and added some items to the side yards of the characters. And then, of course, I had these awkward little extra spots from when I had been doing a little bit of planning ahead of time. And so I went in and I got rid of the weird little spots and I added instead some of the sort of like clear clover path, just so that there was something there, nothing random or weird would spawn there. But it also, took up that space without being too visually heavy back there. And again, just having to fix a little bit of the pathing, I decided it would make more sense for me to actually take away the pathing that was behind the houses. That was an accident, actually taking away the clear clover that I had just put down. I have to go back and place that again later. But you'll notice I decided it didn't make sense to have this pathing back here, especially because I wanted to do the fencing, just like I had done with the front row. I wanted that sort of mirrored in that style, to put the fencing back again at the back of the houses. Again, just giving it that structure and a little bit of consistency throughout the housing district. And so I put the clover again on this area, but then I also pushed the birdhouse back half a space. I didn't want it to be too close to the bush. I didn't want it to feel like it was kind of on top of it. So I just moved that. And then I also moved the tiny library to add a little bit of like a welcome into the neighborhood before, finishing up the pathing that connects this area to the original entrance of the island. I liked the idea of having the entrance be really close to the housing district because I feel like the housing district is something that needs a lot of structure to me. I don't particularly like when I put the houses sort of just willy-nilly throughout the island for my own decorating style. I feel like that's a big challenge to have to do that. So it's a lot easier for me to have to add the houses all in one place instead of worrying about, giving each person their own big yard and terraforming around the house. Because although I think those designs look really, really incredible, I don't feel like that's something that's really easy for me to do or easy for me to incorporate. So I didn't want to have too many houses that I'd have to incorporate into these little sections throughout. And so instead what I decided is I would just do the 6 houses that are here. And so now what you're seeing is kind of a final walkthrough of the area. I did decide, let the bushes grow in, give you an opportunity to sort of see each house. I'm sorry if the video is buffering for you as well. I do notice that that's a problem. I'm not sure what exactly was happening with my capture card at the moment. But, this is sort of the final look that we've got. So we've got the bushes sort of staggered, so they're not all in one spot. And of course, a unique little item by each house to add some personality. Alongside with the flowers and the fencing to give it a little bit of structure, but also being sort of natural at the same time. It was a lot of fun to actually build this. I will say moving the houses, is not the most fun part, but deciding, how am I going to use this path and what am I going to do with the flowers? What sort of fencing should I use? That was all a lot of fun for me. So I'm hoping you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it for you. So you can find all of these pictures that I'm taking on my socials throughout the next week. I'll be posting them. And I also have a Twitch stream that I'm doing. I do Twitch streams on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays. The current timing schedule for that is that 6 p.m. EST on Sundays, and then Mondays and Thursdays are at 7:30 p.m. EST. That schedule is subject to change possibly in the future, but that is currently what we're up to these days. And I hope that you enjoyed watching the video. I hope that this gave you some inspiration or some ideas about, how I decorate and what sort of ideas I use in my own kind of creations and making my island. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Hopefully I'll see you on Twitch or Instagram or YouTube or Twitter or somewhere around the internet. Okay, have a great one.